has been said that every man is the son of his own works. One of my favorite poets is Edgar Allan Poe, and his own life was as bizarre as his tales. His own life story is the story of an author of fantastic imagination, a brilliant editor and critic, a poet tender and cruel, an alcoholic gambler, and debt-ridden neurotic. Poe's parents were strolling players, both of whom died before he was 2 years old, leaving 3 penniless children, William, Rosalie, and Edgar. William became insane, and Rosalie died young. Far more fortunate, Edgar was adopted by a wealthy merchant, John Allan, from whom he took his second name. Heir to a fortune, he was brought up in opulent tradition, and at the age of 17 was sent to the University of Virginia. It was there that Poe came into his tragic self. He drank and gambled himself hopelessly into debt. He was withdrawn from school, disowned by his foster parents, and because he now was no longer heir to the Allan fortune, his fiancée's parents persuaded their daughter, Elmira, to marry a more affluent man. After a 2-year enlistment in the Army, Poe moved to Baltimore to live with Aunt Maria Clem and her daughter, Virginia. There he somehow wrangled enough money to pay a Boston printer to publish some of his poems, and at the same time maneuvered himself into an appointment at West Point. The publishing of his poems was a literary and financial flop, the appointment a disaster. After 1 year, he was dismissed from the Academy for gross neglect of duty and disobedience. Poe's marriage to his cousin Virginia was equally a disaster. To begin with, he was 26 and an alcoholic, while she was a pale and sickly child of 13. The poor girl, though she witnessed some of her husband's finest hours, fell victim to most of his worst. His reckless living and squandering brought her mostly poverty and suffering for 8 years, and finally death, due, it was said, to malnutrition. The bright spots of Poe's life were his days as a magazine editor, contributor, and critic. As editor and critic for the Southern Literary Messenger, he brilliantly tore apart many of his contemporaries and their insipid works. His own crowning work, The Fall of the House of Usher, was published. The bottle and debt cropped up again and again, almost as hurdles between a series of magazine associations. The highlight of this period was the publication and enthusiastic reception of his great poem, The Raven. Poe became a social lion, but financially he received only about $10 for the work. His tragic end started on a note of happiness. Learning that Elmira, his youthful sweetheart, had been widowed, he proposed to her and she accepted. Happily en route to Richmond for the wedding, he stopped off at Baltimore and just disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to Poe in Baltimore. He simply disappeared and was found a few days later in a pitiful drugged condition. It was all over. He died of a violent brain fever, and John Donne, the great English poet and clergyman who lived at the turn of the 17th century, wrote, "Our creatures are our thoughts, creatures that are born giants. My thoughts reach all, comprehend all. Inexplicable mystery. I, their creator, am in a close prison, in a sick bed, anywhere. And any one of my creatures, my thoughts, is with the sun and beyond the sun, overtakes the sun, and overgoes the sun in one pace, one step everywhere." Few of us appreciate the great gift of thought. In an instant, you can be anywhere, experience anything through the miracle of your thought. A man thousands of miles from home can, in his mind, be with his family in a millisecond. As John Donne indicated, we're in a close prison in our bodies and restricted to be in one place at a time, physically, even in a sickbed. But any one of our thoughts can be with the sun and beyond, can go anywhere, experience anything. The more you think about it, the more magical it becomes. I think some people have a more highly developed imagination than others. As children, we all have the wondrous ability to bring interest, adventure, and a whole world of excitement into our lives. Have you ever stood just outside the door of a small child's room and listened to him or her at play? It's wonderful, jabbering away to his imaginary playmate or teddy bear or doll, and the sound effects a small boy can make as he plays with his toys tell you what world he's living in at the moment. As we grow older, we tend to put away the exciting world of imagination, except for the highly creative person. He keeps it alive. It changes, but remains a vital part of his existence. A vivid imagination can be a blessing to the sick and incapacitated. They can travel to the ends of the earth with complete enjoyment, with none of the exasperations and lost baggage and language problems and waiting boredom that is so often a part of real travel. People can be enjoyed without argument or disappointment. It's reported that disadvantaged children often live so much in their imaginations that as they grow older, they fail to take advantage of opportunities which exist in the real world. They wake up in so bleak and forbidding an environment that they immediately escape into the world of fantasy and remain there during all of their waking hours. Man would not be man if his dreams did not exceed his grasp. And the dream, the imagined better world that becomes a goal instead of mere fantasy and escape, can and does become the real world. It's the imagined world of the future that keeps the student at his books, the workman at his job, the wife at her housework. It's what makes the driver mount the cab of his truck and the surgeon scrub up for another operation, and the salesman make another call. The imagination is man's most precious gift, and it's with us every day of our lives. Maybe that's why we sort of tend to take it for granted. Our creatures are our thoughts, creatures that are born giants. My thoughts reach all, comprehend all. Inexplicable mystery. And what you find yourself imagining most is the key to your future. You ever get mixed up with the pronouns I and me? Millions of people do. You find yourself saying, why don't you come with John and I, when you should say, why don't you come with John and me? If you find yourself making this common error, and others in English, let me recommend a good book for you, written by Bergen Evans, one of the country's best-known authorities on English, and published by Random House. It's titled Comfortable Words. On this particular problem, Bergen Evans has this to say. We often hear, he gave it to John and I. The grossness of the error is made clear if the recipients are put into separate sentences. He gave it to I would surely grate on any ear. The construction, which is common among the half-educated but is never heard among the educated or the uneducated, seems to have had its origin in a fear of the word me in combination with another pronoun. Possibly those who use the gave it to John and I construction had been furiously rebuked or savagely derided in their childhood for saying John and me did this or that. Someone shouted John and I at them or made them stay after school and write John and I on the blackboard 200 times, and John and I it thereupon became in all circumstances. Certainly many middle-class Americans seem afraid of the word me. Some panic-stricken say he gave it to John and I. Others use the equally ghastly, less incorrect, but more affected and self-conscious, he gave it to John and myself. So then the trick is, if you are troubled by this one, to say the sentence first mentally and leave the other person out of it. To yourself say, he gave it to me. Then aloud say, he gave it to John and me. Another common error is found in the misuse of the contraction don't. It stands for the words do not, and it is considered substandard to use it for the words does not. If you mean does not, say doesn't, as in the sentence, it doesn't make any difference. You wouldn't say it do not make any difference. And did you ever wonder why the word Mayday is used as the international distress call? It comes from two French words, Mayday meaning help me. Another word frequently misused is livid. Livid and vivid are almost exact opposites. Yet they're frequently confused. Livid is a particularly gruesome shade of blue, a leaden gray tinged with blue. It's the color of corpses and bruises. Etymologically, it's related to lavender. Vivid means vigorous, intense, brilliant, bright-colored. It comes from the Latin word meaning to live, and it's related to vivacious, and its synonyms are clear, lucid, bright. If you like the English language, get the book Comfortable Words by Bergen Evans. Make sure the kids read it too. It can do a lot for their grades in school. To be able to effectively communicate with others is a priceless asset, and is one any person can acquire. Once upon a time, there was a man who felt he'd reached the end of his rope. It seemed that all the interest had suddenly vanished from his life. His creative wells had seemingly dried up. He still had his work, but it suddenly seemed meaningless to him. Even his family and his home receded darkly in his mind. And finally, nearing the point of desperation, he went to see his old friend, the family doctor. The doctor listened to his story, saw the depths of his depression, and then asked him, when you were a child, what did you like to do best? I like to visit the seashore. All right, the doctor said, you must do exactly as I tell you. I want you to spend all day tomorrow at the shore. Find a lonely stretch of beach and spend the entire day there from 9 in the morning until 6 in the evening. Take nothing to read and do nothing calculated to distract you in any way. I'm going to give you 4 prescriptions in order. Take the first at 9, the second at 12 noon, the third at 3 o'clock, and the last at 6. Don't look at them now. Wait until you arrive at the shore tomorrow morning. Well, the man promised he'd take the doctor's advice, and the next morning, a little before 9, he parked his car on a lonely stretch of beach. There was a strong wind blowing in from the sea, and the surf was high and pounding. He walked to a sand dune near the seething surf and sat down. He took out prescription number 1, opened it, and read it. It said, "Listen." That was all that was written on it, the one word, listen. And so for 3 hours, that's all he did. He listened to the sound of the buffeting wind and the lonely cries of the gulls. He listened to the sound of the booming surf. He sat quietly, and he listened. At noon, he read the second prescription. It said simply, "Reach back." And so for the next 3 hours, he did just that. He let his mind go back as far as it could go, and he thought of all the incidents of his life he could remember, the happy times, the good times, the struggles, and the successes. At 3 o'clock, he tore open the third prescription. It read, "Re-examine your motives." And this took so much intense thought and concentration that the remaining 3 hours slipped quickly by. For 3 hours, he re-examined his motives, his reasons for living and moving closer to fulfillment. He clarified and restated his goals. And at 6 o'clock, under a gray, darkening sky and with a taste of salt spray on the wind, he read the fourth and final prescription. It read, "Write your worries in the sand." There had been one thing that had been worrying him particularly, so he walked to the hard sand and with a stick wrote this worry in the sand and stood looking at it for a moment. Then as he walked toward where his car was parked, he looked back and saw that the incoming tide had already erased his worry. He then got in his car and drove homeward. Listen, reach back, re-examine your motives, and then write your worries in the sand. Did you know that a famous agnostic inspired the writing of one of the most famous biblical novels of all time? One evening in September 1870, 2 men riding a train across Indiana struck up a conversation. Soon they began arguing about the inspiration of the Bible and the message of Jesus Christ. Robert G. Ingersoll, internationally famous as a challenger of Scripture's message, was trying to convince General Lewis Wallace that he didn't know what he was talking about. General Wallace, better known as Lou, the Indiana-born officer, fought through the whole of the Civil War. He participated in many lesser engagements and then took part in the bloody Battle of Shiloh. Later, he prepared the defenses for Cincinnati and was made commander of the 8th Army Corps. After hostilities ceased, he resumed his legal practice. But the lawyer and veteran of many battles was unable to cope with the brilliant Robert G. Ingersoll. He felt frustrated and defeated when he parted company with the noted agnostic, having failed to make any dent in the network of arguments with which Ingersoll defended himself from the challenge of faith. As a result, Lew Wallace went home determined to write a novel that would serve as a powerful argument for the divinity of Christ. Finished while he was serving as governor of the territory of New Mexico, it was entitled Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, one of the most popular books of this century. It presents the message of the New Testament within a framework of vigorous action that involves believable characters. Ingersoll didn't live to realize it, but the story his argument inspired became widely read even in regions of the United States where all novels had previously been frowned upon as immoral. The book spread all over the world. It was translated into dozens of languages. It isn't the story that's so important in itself, and you're probably wondering if I'll ever get around to telling it. The important thing is that we apply the principle of the story to our own lives. The story is about a farmer who lived in Africa at the time diamonds were discovered there. When a visitor to his farm told him of the millions being made by men who were discovering diamond mines, he promptly sold his farm and left to search for diamonds himself. He wandered all over the continent, found no diamonds, and as the story has it, finally penniless, in poor health, and despondent, threw himself into a river and drowned. Well, long before this, the man who had bought his farm found a large, unusual-looking stone in the creek bed which ran through the farm and put it on his mantle as a curio. Enter here the same visitor who had told the original farmer about the diamond discoveries. He examined the stone and told the new owner that he had discovered one of the largest diamonds ever found, and that it was worth a king's ransom. To his surprise, the farmer told him the entire farm was covered with stones of that kind. And to make a long story short, if it isn't already too late, the farm, which the first farmer had sold so that he could go look for diamonds, turned out to be one of the richest diamond mines in the world. The point Dr. Conwell made was that the first farmer had owned acres of diamonds, but had made the mistake of not examining what he had before he ran off to something he hoped would prove to be better. He would then point out that each of us is like that first farmer. No matter where we live or what we do, we're surrounded by acres of diamonds if we'll simply look for them. Like the curious appearing stones which covered the farm, they might not appear to be diamonds at first glance, but a little study, a deeper examination, and some polishing will usually reveal our opportunities and perhaps uncover our own hidden talents and abilities and genius for what they really are. We just haven't been looking for them.